Welcome back, scholars. Now let's get into editing. As you're approaching your portfolios, you have probably done revisions, you've gotten peer feedback, you've had peer feedback, you've given peer feedback, you've learned stuff from the other pieces you've written, you've left some stuff for a few weeks that you haven't read in a while and picked it up again. So all of these things should have given you ambient ideas on how to make the key points stronger and tighter. Now let's talk about polishing the actual words, getting down to that paragraph level, sentence level, word level editing, which you can't do until you're done with revisions. Let's start with my sort of 6 draft approach. I'm not saying that they have to be completely different drafts, but in general, I run through where I'm just looking like, are there citations wherever citations are supposed to be? That is one of the first things that I do for my own work of academic rigor, is anything that has a quote cited. If I've just like thrown some facts out there, where did I get those? Double check that stuff. Make sure your citations are in order and the way that they need to be for the thing that you're doing. Reducing redundancy. I think this is one of those places where when you have a good point and in the draft process, you tend to try to say it blatantly. You bring up the same thing over and over again, and you should, because you're reinforcing a point, but finding, like, when you've literally just repeated yourself, trimming that stuff, or at least rewording it so that it has a new reason to be there if it should be there. Editing for consistency, I think that's also language and grammar, but the flow. So if you've reshuffled a bunch of stuff in your revision, you've reorganized, rearranged, you've got to make sure that you aren't like, as I discussed earlier, and now that thing's first and not next. Signposting and linking. Now is when you should probably be writing those sections of, as I discussed earlier, or to recall. You're signposting sort of the order of your argument at this point. Linking up points, like, speaking of blah, 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 that's signposting and linking. You're sort of smoothing out transitions between ideas or 2 paragraphs that are basically talking about the same thing, but a little differently, or adding something else on. That's where you give those sort of cues verbally to link what this has to do with the last thing you said, or how it leads into the next thing you're saying. And then finally, redraft, proofreading, grammar, that sort of thing. Yes, I tend to just do it like a hunt, not a shop, because if you try to do too many things at once when you're editing, you'll miss them all. Just like when you know what you were trying to say and you will reread something over and over again and someone will say, there's a mistake in there. You know what you were trying to say, so you're not even reading it. You're just walking through it in your brain. You're not seeing it. So if you hunt for these very particular things, you will find them. If you try to do all the editing things at once, you'll miss a lot. And that's certainly how my brain works. We scan for one thing, you can burn through it very quickly. Advice from Ernest Hemingway. I think use short sentences is great. I write in very long sentences generally because complex ideas sometimes mean compound sentences, but making sure that you're at least mixing that up. And if you have something important to say, put it in a short sentence, especially if you have a tendency to write longer sentences. If you change that flow, it will make people sort of pay attention, especially if you throw in a short sentence where you really want something memorable, or that's your main point. There should be a short sentence that gives you some real kick to what you were trying to say in every single paragraph. So make sure that it's very clear what you're trying to say in each paragraph, and maybe put it in as short and clear and succinct of a sentence as you can. Use short first paragraphs. Yeah, when you're introducing, like, I need to know what your thesis is and how you're going to tell me. That's the great way to make sure we're all clear and it's structured and it's not confusing to begin with. Making your thesis the last sentence of the first paragraph, I don't buy that. You know what a great opening sentence is? Your point. So the thesis can be the very first sentence, and then you map out how you're going to prove that to me. Use vigorous language. That is one of those like to be or passive verbs tend like they don't work as well. It's not as good of writing as active verbs. We'll get into that here in a minute. Be positive, not negative, especially when you're trying to communicate something that's difficult. Don't work in negatives, work in positives as much as possible. Here we've got George Orwell. Yeah, and don't have 5 rules. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you're used to seeing in print. That's basically his way of avoid cliches. Never use long words where a short one will do. Basically, that whole, it doesn't make you sound smarter to use longer words. What makes you sound smarter is being very clear about what you're trying to say. Sometimes you have to use a longer word because it's more precise on exactly what you mean, but that should be the only reason why you would use a longer word instead of a shorter one. If it's possible to cut a word, cut it. We're going to talk about that right now. Never use a foreign phrase, scientific word, or jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Sometimes you have to use specialist language, but you need to introduce it and teach it to your audience, and your entire paper doesn't need to turn into a technical language encyclopedia. So use what you're gonna use sparingly, teach us what it means to you in this context, and then use it consistently throughout your paper. And if you could just say a normal English word, use that instead. All right. We're going to talk about words to delete. Oh, I don't think I can. Maybe? Nope. All right. That'll be a separate thing. That is a great word to get rid of. There are words, if you can read a sentence and it still makes sense without the that in there, cut it out. So we use them to signpost. We use a lot more signpost words when we're speaking because somebody has to be able to keep track of what we're saying without being able to reread. So that is one of those words that we use to sort of signpost where our sentence is going. So here we have this paragraph written with some that's crossed out. This is the first thing I tell writers to get rid of. That works, which means we don't need the that, because that works. There are 2 kinds of that's. That part, like you can't be like, there are 2 kinds of, we're talking about that, so there's the that. The ones you need and the ones you don't. See, you didn't need either of those 2. When you delete a that, reread the sentence and see if it still makes sense. If it does, you didn't need it. If it doesn't, you did. So, this is the food I ordered. Yup. Whereas I want to eat that steak. If I want to eat steak, cool. That's a general statement. But if you're standing at the butcher counter or, I don't know, Red Lobster, do they still have the big tank with the lobsters? You don't want to be like, I want to eat lobster. They're like, we know that's why you're standing in front of the water tank. No, you say, I want to eat that lobster. You're specifying. In that case, the that is important because it changes the meaning of the sentence. Most of the time, however, I think you'll notice that the that's in your writing are not necessary. So go into the little search bar, put that, and run through your entire paper. Just reread the sentence that every single that is in. And if it makes sense without it, cut it. All right, so our next adventure is adverbs. This is something that I think, again, with language, I like adverbs, but with writing, I do not. In general, words that end in ly. These are these words that are used to kind of decorate your verbs. Sometimes it's more specific, sometimes it adds context, but in general, they're unnecessary. And they add kind of a weird floweriness to your language that moves away from the point often. If you need to have an adverb with your verb, maybe it's not the right verb, if that makes sense. I don't know, she walked lazily towards him. I mean, you're not writing like paperback novels in this class. You're writing sort of research, you're having memoirs, you're doing work where you're communicating. And I think it's very good to look for every single adverb, verb, word, and think about it. Very doesn't do anything. If it was very important, then maybe you should find a way to contextualize so that we understand that it was important. Important is important. So, having to say like, my close personal friend. It's like, what other kind of friends do you have? Like friends. Other people who aren't really your friends are acquaintances, right? Work colleagues. My personal doctor. It's like, no, he's just my doctor unless he literally lives in my house and I'm his only patient. So these kind of verbal tics that we have where it's really exciting. Do you need you maybe need that in language, but when you're in text, try to rein it in. So look at those adverbs, look at those verys and literallys and reallys, and make sure that they are necessary. Notice how I could have said, make sure they are absolutely necessary. No, just necessary. To just keep it clean, and it shortens your sentences. And as we talked about, that is better writing where possible. Commonplace, cliches, turns of phrase that you're used to hearing in writing. This is something that one of our great authors warned you against. Just a good idea. So if you're used to seeing something in print, it loses its oomph. I would use it only if I were talking about how common and pointless it is. So if you're doing some sort of like language analysis of a piece of literature, then you might bring in one of the cliches and be like, Shakespeare coined this, so it was actually exciting writing at this time, but now it's become hecka cliche. So you don't want to be talking like that. Trim the bits, okay? She ran straight into his arms. Straight there, like not a zigzag pattern or answered a text first. She ran into his arms. So most modifiers, and again, adverbs are modifiers, they modify the verb. In general, if you need the modifier, think about whether or not you've just like put a feather hat on the wrong character, right? Just, is it the right verb? If you had to add an adverb to make that verb do the thing, is there a better single word that would do the work of all 2 or 3 words that you're using? So think about being precise and accurate. And often if you're adding all of these sort of decorative modifying words, there was probably one word that would have done the work of all 3 of those. Here we have the finale, to be or not to be. That is Shakespeare's question. There is, let's see, I used is. Sometimes something just is, and in the name of making a brief, short sentence, sometimes things just are. So don't get rid of all of them. Sometimes I make you get rid of all of them on one page. Other professors make you get rid of all of them all the time, but then sometimes you'll be doing some serious gymnastics to make a sentence say what you wanted to say. But in general, there is usually a word in that sentence already that would make a perfectly suitable, much more vigorous, active term or verb. So if you want to say like, Diane Sawyer is the anchor of world news tonight. Anchor is a verb. So if you said Diane Sawyer anchors world news tonight, it's now a shorter sentence, more vigorous language, and you said exactly what she does, not what she is. So go through your sentences where you've got is and are's, and just see if there's another word in there that would be, you say they are blank. Um, does the blank actually serve as an action verb? If so, use it. That is much better writing. The fewer am, are, is words you use in a paper, the better it is. You may have to use a few just to avoid the ridiculousness of trying to get around something that just is. But in general, if you can bring that down to rarely in your writing will be better. So I hope that helps on rounds 1 through 6 of editing.